Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar event, an overview of migration statistics. To introduce myself, my name is Joseph O'Leary. I'm a writer researcher at Full Fact. And today we're going to talk to a number of statistics producers about the material that they produce, and we're going to have some Q&A as well provided for that. Just to remind you all, if you can please mute your phone by pressing *6 so that there's not too much interference during the presentation. And you can use the Q&A function at the top of the screen to ask questions at any time. I'll receive them, and if you like, I can relay them to the speakers when we have time for Q&A after that. To briefly introduce Full Fact, we are the UK's independent facts-checking organisation, so we check claims that politicians, the media and pressure groups make. We check them for accuracy and we publish our findings online. Today we're going to start with a number of presentations. So the first presentation will be from the United Nations. So first of all we'll be talking to Clare Menozzi. She's Population Affairs Officer in the Migration section of the Population Division at the Department of Economic and Social Affairs at the United Nations. She joined that in 2004. She was also involved in the preparations for both the 2006 and 2013 dialogues on international migration and development. She's worked in the Statistics Division of the UNDESA and the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. She's also the main author of a comprehensive UN study on domestic and inter-country adoption. Also speaking from the UN is Haoyi Chen. She's a statistician at the United Nations Statistics Division, joined that in 2002 after obtaining a doctor's degree at the University of Florida. Her work has included preparing methodological guidelines on various topics such as international migration statistics, civil registration and vital statistics, and gender statistics, providing technical training to national statistics offices. The second presentation we'll have after that will be from Eurostat, and Piotr Juchno is here from there. He graduated in international economics at Warsaw University. He worked in economic research until joining the European Commission in 2005, working in the Population Statistics Unit of Eurostat for nearly 10 years. He's responsible for the implementation and coordination of the migration statistics regulation in the areas of asylum enforcement and the residence permits statistics since 2008. He's also responsible for the area of migration integration statistics. So we're going to hand over now to Clare and Haoyi, who are going to take us through their presentation. So I'll hand over to them right now. Thank you very much.
In my presentation today, I'd like to give you an overview of some of the work my division does, the Population Division of the UN, in relation to international migration data. And I'd like to focus on four main areas: net migration, international migrant stocks, international migration flows, and international migration policies. On the third slide, you can see net migration. And this is a snapshot of our website of data that the division estimates. First of all, what is net migration? Net migration refers to the difference between the number of international immigrants and the number of emigrants. The division estimates these data based on empirical data, but they are also produced as a byproduct of a more complex procedure to estimate total population and deaths for all countries of the world. In addition to estimates, the division also produces projections that extend up to 2100, again, for all countries and areas of the world. These data are extremely useful because they give us a sense, a proxy of flows. However, they also have limitations. First of all, they are residual, and secondly, they don't distinguish regarding who is actually moving, so they include both foreigners and citizens. The second important data set I wanted to draw your attention to is international migrant stocks. And these, again, are estimates produced by our division, and we use empirical data, mainly from censuses, to produce them, but we also model them. In this way, we are able to have comparable data for all countries for specific points in time. The data, in addition to totals, are also estimated for sex, age, and origin. These are extremely useful because they allow us to not only say, for example, if international migrants are becoming more feminized, but also where elderly migrants might live. And if we take the information on origin, it allows us to have an estimate of the diaspora, for example, how many people from a certain country are living in other countries of the world at some point in time. The data are available again on our website for free. At the moment, we are updating our estimates. The snapshot you have on the slide refers to data for 2013. And the new estimates will be available probably in December and will be for the years 1990, 95, 2000, 2005, 2010, and 2015. The third type of information that we collect are migration flows. And unlike the previous two sets that I presented, these are empirical data that we compile from stats offices from around the world, but also taking data from Eurostat. And they usually, we have different types of migration flows, both the number of immigrants, the number of emigrants, and net migration. And we have different types of coverage, both by country of birth, country of citizenship, and a place of residence. Compared to the estimates, the data are available for a much smaller number of countries, 43, as in our last revision. And the data coverage is from 1980 to 2010. It's much more spotty. It depends on the country, how much data actually we have available. The final data set I wanted to draw your attention to is international migration policies. The division collects through a series of questionnaires data on policies for all UN member states and non-member states, 195, in relation to population, but also international migration and immigration. You can see from the slide that we actually have a large number of variables that the division collects information on, from policies on immigration, but also much more detailed, for example, on naturalization, on return, on dual citizenship. And many of these variables are available as a time series going back to 1976, which allows to do some interesting comparative and also time series analysis. On the basis of these data sets, our division produces a large number of reports, technical reports, analytical reports, also more simple products such as fact sheets and wall charts, which are available on our website for free. And to conclude, I wanted to draw your attention to an important milestone, which is going to take place in the UN in a couple of weeks, which is the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is a transformative agenda which contains 17 goals and 169 targets. And what's interesting about this is that for the first time, there will be a number of specific targets in this framework that refer to international migration. Given the lack of time, I won't go into the details now, but I think it's very important from a statistical perspective to think of the implications of what having these specific targets related to migration will be for capacity building, collection, and ensuring that we have the data to actually monitor the achievement of these targets. Thank you very much.
Claire, thank you very much for that. So do we have Haoyi here?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, would you like to proceed with your presentation then? We'll be able to do some Q&A later on that.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
With the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development Goals and a migration data requirement or data needs on international migration will be really increasing. And our division, UN Statistics Division, does a lot of work on compiling or making guidelines for countries on data collection and also collect data from national statistical offices on data including international migration. Today I'll be really focusing on population censuses as a data source. So as 2014 is the last year of 2010 round of program on population housing censuses, so we have a huge amount of a number of countries that conducted censuses in this round. So we only have 20 countries who haven't had a census in the past 10 years. So that means censuses have been conducted in most countries. It is a source that is really available in most countries, and it's also because census covers everybody in the country. So for a country that migration population is a small proportion, that really allows us to capture migrants properly. So So these are all the great opportunities we're seeing from censuses. And also, because census is a huge endeavor and the questionnaire usually doesn't allow us to put a lot of information or a lot of questions, so the questions on migration tend to be very concise. That gives us an advantage that in that way the data came from countries that are more comparable. And the last item I want to mention about opportunities from censuses is there are a lot of other variables that are being collected in censuses, and for example, age, sex, and marital status, and labor market indicators also. So that way that allows us to characterizing migrants, so we know who they are and what their education level is, and then what their labor market status is. Next, most of countries have, or almost all countries that collect data or conduct a census have some information related to international migration. And look at the list. The first 3 bold bullets are the core topics that United Nations recommend all censuses should be collecting. So there are core topics. And the first one is country of birth, and then country of citizenship. And the third is period or year of arrival in the country for those who are born abroad, so for foreign-borns. And then there are other topics that are being collected by countries, and that we often see is, for example, emigration of household members have been such interest for a lot of countries that send migrants to other countries. And also countries that see a lot of return migrants tend to ask question on whether the citizens have ever lived abroad and when did they come back. So migration census also collects or can be used to compile some flow statistics using the duration variable or using the intercensal flow calculation. So given the advantage, and this is our division runs the census program, World Census Program, and we gather all the census questionnaires from countries, and then we analyze all the questions they've asked. So if we are able to, if we just focus on let me see what I can annotate. Focus on the 2010 round here. And the blue bars here on the top that we analyzed, or the data census questionnaire that are available to us, we analyzed 126 censuses, and we get to see more than 70% of them had a question on country of birth, and also close to 70% have a question on citizenship. And so if we put these two together, country of birth and citizenship together as country of origin, almost all countries, I would say above 90% of countries or censuses have at least one question on either country of birth or citizenship. And the coverage for year of arrival is much lower. It's because in Africa, a lot of countries do not collect such variable. But in general, we do see a lot of opportunities, and then it is possible for us to have internationally comparable data from almost all the countries that have had censuses. However, if we look at the in reality, again, if we focus on the 2010 round here, among countries, for the left part, that among countries that have collected data, information on country of birth, only 44% provided some data, or we have access to their census data tabulation for the 2010 round of censuses. And similarly for citizenship, the percentage is slightly higher, 47%, but it's still very low. So these are information that came from our UN demographic yearbook that we send census questionnaires to countries after we know then a census has been conducted. So this concludes my presentation, where I'm just trying to say that we actually have a huge opportunity in front of us to get comparable data across countries, but then there's still a lot of challenges, and in getting the data there although they've been collected, but they're not available, or portion of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Haoyi. Just a reminder to everyone, you can ask any questions you like using the Q&A function at the top, and we'll come to them after the next presentation. So do get involved. And just a reminder as well that this webinar is being recorded and will be available after the event. It will be posted online. So I'd now like to move on to the third presentation, indeed, from Piotr Juchno from Eurostat, who's going to take us through Eurostat statistics on migration. So over to you, Peter.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. I will start my presentation with actually trying to clarify what the migration means, because we have noticed that recently, also due to the recent crisis in migration in Europe, but also in worldwide, many people are using the term migration in various contexts. And often we notice that while speaking with the people somewhere at the middle of, or sometimes at the end of the discussions, you see that actually the scope of that what you were thinking of was quite different. That's why I would like to start my presentation with showing what are the different types of migration areas that we are trying to capture in Eurostat. A part of that, what I will tell you now, there will be also other types of data that we in Eurostat also collect in the area of population statistics. Here you was mentioning the censuses. This is also something that Eurostat coordinates at the EU level, of course. So that's one of the principal sources of the population statistics. Now, going to the existing areas. What are the policy interests in our data? The first one is the so-called classical type of migration, which is based on the demographical information and is based on the change of usual residence. So in principle, this is something that the colleagues from UNSD were just referring to. That is the stock of foreign people, or the migration flows. The second type of migration statistics that we often refer to is so-called labor mobility. And this is very widely understood as all the different types of movements of workers. And this is something that I would like to introduce in the following slide. It is interesting because this is relatively new area also of interest of Eurostat. Then the third type of statistics on migration that we distinguish here internally is everything that it's referring to, in particularly important in the context of the European Union countries, the migration from outside of the EU. And here we refer to asylum and managed migration area. That is in principle the data which can be captured well from the administrative sources. But it also includes information on enforcement. So going to the topic on that, what we currently try to introduce and try to work out is the intra-EU labor mobility. We have seen that there is an extremely growing interest in that, and also the European Commission considers this to be one of the top priorities. And the difficulty here is, however, that it's first of all difficult to define, because there are different types of migration movements which are of relevance. And this is not just labor migration, because this could be very easily captured through the use of existing surveys or censuses. But this is more because it includes also cross-border labor mobility. It includes also what we call here locally frontaliers, that is people that are, for instance, in Luxembourg, commuting every day to work in Luxembourg while they are keeping the usual residence abroad. This also includes seasonal workers or posted workers. As I mentioned, there are already existing data sources on that. and this could be the existing surveys, but not all the existing surveys can capture the entire phenomenon. So what are the main problems with measuring this? This is mainly the problem of the existing sample size of the existing labor force survey, which for the populations like migrants, which are not big enough in all the countries, at least in the context of the European Union, does not allow for the very detailed analysis. What is probably, however, more important from our considerations is that we still miss the conceptual framework of capturing that. We see that there is a big policy need for monitoring intra-EU movement. However, we are a little bit still yet far from having the methodological framework of that and defining who should be the scope of this type of statistics. Then going to the other types of data that we collect, they are in principle developed from different origins, and one of that is what I already mentioned: statistics on migration flows in foreign population. That's what the colleagues from UNSD also are doing. Then the asylum managed migration part of the data. The last thing is something that I'm also involved in personally, that is trying to the attempt to measure level of integration of migrants. While what is easy with the first two areas is that they are based on the regulatory framework of the European Union, Migration Statistics Regulation. The third part is based on various existing sources. And the main sources here are the Labour Force Survey and the European Survey on Income and Living Conditions. What concerns the international migration statistics, as I mentioned before, it covers flows and stocks as well as the acquisition of citizenship. This data are coming to Eurostat from the National Statistical Institute, and they are based on the various types of sources. What is most important in work in Eurostat is to ensure that the data at the EU level are as comparable as possible. So here we work mainly on the basis of agreed definitions, and here we applied, of course, also the international recommendations used. And the main two definitions here, concepts, are how to define the usual resident and who is being considered as a migrant. As you've seen, the definition of migrant is someone who changes the country of usual residence for 12 months and more. This stays obviously in a contradiction of that what we call labor mobility, and we can also consider these people as migrants. In the area of asylum and managed migration, the main areas or main questions that we are trying to respond to is where the migrants are coming from, what are the reasons for them to come. This can be education, this can be work, this can be family reasons or international protection or many other reasons. How do they come? What are the modes? And what are the skills and qualifications? This was also mentioned in the previous slide from UNSD. Socioeconomic information on migrants. In this area, we have a very well developed collections on asylum and Dublin statistics, and which are based on the Migration Statistics Regulation. Then also the area of residence permits and enforcement statistics. This is based on the Migration Statistics Regulation, but also on other types of derived regulations or other migration schemes, like recently introduced EU Blue Card. Sometimes part of the collections may be based on the gentlemen's agreements. That means there is no specific obligation for the countries to deliver the data, but we try to agree with the countries on the mode. of delivering the data. Now, we are trying to, of course, respond to the rising policy needs and try to improve the data collections, particularly in the area of asylum and managed migration. We have seen recently a number of methodological improvements, new guidelines being delivered to the stakeholders. This is all with the aim of having more harmonized, more comparable statistics. However, there are still areas which are extremely difficult to measure, and this is first of all the irregular migration. The issue of measuring rare populations. We often have also difficulties with measuring information on ethnicity. And last but not least, there are more specific points, like trying to find out what are the real numbers of asylum seekers in the EU, for instance. Recently, we were trying to respond to the questions like those people who enter the EU now seeking asylum through Hungary and then going to Germany or Sweden. They are in principle often double counted, and we would like to know what is actually the net figure of those entering the EU. The current methodology does not allow, because the registration systems in the EU are not interlinked, and this does not allow exchange of the microinformation. And at the end of that, of course, I'm sure that most of you know very well where to find the information on migration on Eurostat website. There are various ways to come to the same place, but that is to the database. First of all, you can simply search the database in different areas. You see here the areas of demography and migration statistics, and then asylum and managed migration. These are the key areas. Also, the information on population projections mentioned by the UNSD, and the population and housing censuses. These are 4 areas of the population statistics in Eurostat. What may be a little bit easier is also you can search the data by the different themes of statistics. Here again, you have the opportunity to choose the population social conditions, and you can easily find out different areas of statistics. This is a little bit repetitive to that what I was showing before, but it's a different way to get the same information. In terms of publications, I would just like to turn your attention to that, what is most tempting probably, and it's more up to date. These are the Statistics Explained articles. They are in a layout, bit of the Wikipedia style layout, where we production units have the opportunity to very easily, with a lot of flexibility, to draft articles, small analysis of the existing data. This allows for very frequent updates. Whenever the new data are online, are available, then we can update the articles. This is much easier to do than with the traditional paper publications. But of course, there are tools which allow you to print out the analysis, including graphs and charts, tables. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Piotr. Now, let's have a short time, 5 minutes or so, just for some questions. So if you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat box, and we'll be able to ask them for you. We've had a few questions coming in during those presentations. So let's start at the beginning with Clare's presentation from the UN. And we had a question come in from Ed Smithson. Ed, would you like to ask your question on that presentation?
Yeah, my question was just about, it would seem intuitively that migrant populations might be more prone to be undercounted in censuses. I just wondered if there was any more whether that was a right intuition and what the evidence was on that.
Yeah, so I think, do you want me to answer?
Yes, please, go ahead.
So this is Clare from Population Division. Yes, I think you have a valid point. There is some undercount, and we try to take that into consideration when we do the estimates by adjusting. I think for us, since we do estimates for every country and area in the world, you have to realize sometimes even if there is a serious undercount in the census, we consider that wonderful data because our problem really is the lack of information for many parts of the world. As Haoyi mentioned in her presentation, using data from the Statistics Division, there are large parts of the world where we really don't have much empirical data, and that makes our job very difficult.
Thank you, Emma. Another question came in just before, thank you, Claire. A question came in just before about your particular part of the presentation. What needs to be done to ensure that data on international migration are more widely available for all countries?
Yes, I think that's something both Haoyi and myself, maybe Haoyi wants to add. I think one of the areas that really needs to be looked at is improving the statistical capacity, particularly in countries with very poor empirical data. And in addition to ensuring that countries conduct censuses, it's also important to ensure that data that is conducted actually is published and disseminated. What we're seeing is that many countries are collecting information on country of birth or country of citizenship, but actually the data is never published or disseminated, and of course that's a bottleneck that needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Do you have any addition to that?
No, I completely agree with Claire. And sometimes the reason behind why data were not compiled or disseminated, there could be lack of resources, but then sometimes it's the data, when they see the data, it's so sensitive to the politicians, so they're not publishing them. So that, I think, it needs some kind of other, in addition to technical assistance or even financial resources. Because census has such big data sets, after they compiled, 5 years later, we see some data, if we're lucky. Migration seems to be always, for some countries, not a first priority to compile. So they remain to be the last topic to process or never get published.
I see. I have one further question on your presentation, Haoyi, if I may.
Yes, sure.
One of your slides talked about the different types of data that are measured internationally. One of the things you mentioned was reason for migration.
Yes.
And I was wondering how widely available you find that aspect of the data.
I can get back to you a bit later, maybe, on the numbers.
Yes, of course. You have some really interesting graphs at the end of your presentation, and I'd be really interested to see, some of the other areas as well, if there's any data on that.
Yes, sure. We don't collect, so the demographic yearbook, we only collect data on country, person, situation, then by age and sex. You see how the end of slides, last slide that has, I had for, where is it? When the data get more disaggregated, we have by age and sex, and then educational attainment, and then country of origin. But then we don't, for example, a lot of countries are into emigration, but we don't collect data. Well, knowing that using census to collect data on emigration is not a good, it's not an optimal way. But then countries are just out of, other methods, that's the only thing they have. So they put a half-page question on immigration, but we don't collect anything on it.
Thank you very much. Just moving quickly on to questions about Piotr's presentation. Andrew Martindale from the ONS asked in the public chat, Piotr, this Dublin data that you mentioned, what exactly is that?
Yeah, good question. Sorry, I should have maybe responded to that before, explained that before. It's definitely not data coming from Dublin, but this is something relating to the asylum system in Europe, and it's based on a specific regulation which attempts to or tries to identify the countries the country which is responsible for assessing asylum application. In short, the objective of this regulation is, giving you an example, when an asylum seeker enters EU to Poland and applies for asylum in Poland, but then absconds and travels to Germany and applies for asylum in Germany, based on the Dublin system and a specific system of fingerprints, countries are able to send the request to the country of the original country of asylum application, and in that sense the person can be sent back to Poland from Germany. Eurostat collects such information on the requests being sent between the countries, and then on the transfers, or the actual transfers.
Thank you very much for that, Piotr. We'll have time for more questions later, but I think we'll press on with the next presentation, and I'll come back to some of the questions at the end, if that's all right. As another reminder, we're open for questions, so as many as you have, please do put them in the Q&A section at the top. So now we're going to move on to Dr. Yvonni Markaki from the Migration Observatory. She's a research officer, and she specializes in applied economic and social research on international migration. Her interests include the impacts of international migration, immigrants' integration and participation in the labour market, public opinion, and poverty. So over to you, Yvonni.
Hello, let me introduce myself. My name is Yvonni. I am working with the Migration Observatory. The Migration Observatory is a project based at the University of Oxford and part of the Research Centre on Migration Policy and Society. And our purpose is basically to take all of these wonderful evidence sources on migration and provide analysis and present them in a way that the public can understand, and in this sense inform the debate on migration in the UK. So to move on to my presentation, today I would like to provide a brief overview of the types of migration information that we have, what they mean, and what we can understand based on what we have available. So we have seen this already, but in academic and analytical terms, I want to reiterate what we consider migration. In broad terms, migration is the movement or relocation of a person from one geographical area to another. It's important to remember that migration can be both internal and international. It can be long-term or short-term. And in a large umbrella, we usually see it in two main categories, as voluntary, so for study, work, or family unification, or forced, which is usually displacement, refuge, asylum, etc. As you have noticed, the majority of migration statistics relate to long-term international and voluntary migration, in the sense that they define a migrant, a person who moved to take up residence in another country for a minimum of 12 months. That is the main cutoff point that we use. For the most part, forced migration and short-term migration are measured and discussed separately. So, who counts as an international migrant? The definition of international migrant come in many, many ways, and they depend on who is being addressed, the sources of evidence, and many other considerations. So at times we hear country of birth. So it's a person, migrant is a person who is resident in the country in a different country from the country that they were born. We often see nationality or passports held because they matter in terms of immigration and border control. Sometimes we focus on length of stay because, for example, if we're talking about benefits entitlements, we might focus on long-term migrants, or earlier migrants or recent migrants. And at times, depending on the analysis, we might even talk about ethnicity, language spoken, perceived national identity or parents' origin for second and third generation migrants. It is important to note that the definitions that we use as social researchers and statisticians to produce and analyze statistics do not necessarily coincide with legally recognized definitions that are used by law enforcement, border control, international organizations, etc. So why does it matter, the definitions that we use to define an international migrant? Using the same source of data, which is the 2011 census for England and Wales, for this presentation, I took a number of different definitions that we've heard over time about who constitutes a migrant. So we see that if you look at non-UK born usual residents, you get an estimate for 2011 of about 7.5 million people. If you look, however, at those who hold non-UK passports, this number falls to about 4 million. If we focus on those who are subject to immigration control because of their passport, and we focus on those who hold non-EU passports, then the number is about 2.5 million. If we focus on length of residence and we look at those who are non-UK born and arrived within the past 5 years, the number is obviously smaller. If we use language, ethnicity, or national identity, obviously there are different numbers that result. We've seen this already, but to make it more substantial, the two umbrella ways that we measure migration is one is flows and the other one is stocks. Flows express movement of people to an area and from and to an area. So immigration is the number of people who move out to another country. Immigration is the number of people who move into a country. So, for example, from Italy to the UK. Emigration is the number of people who leave to take up residence somewhere else. And the balance is the difference between those who came and those who left. Stocks are a different type of measure, and they try to express the total number of people present at any given time. So what happens with our sources of data? When we try to measure the number of migrants or the number of migrants in the labor market, we need to rely on different sources of information. The main source of information we use, and the more reliable one, surely, is the Census of Population. We are all familiar with it. It takes place every 10 years, and it really attempts to count everyone. Administrative data is a different type of information, and it's usually collected by government departments or other organizations as part of registration and record keeping, usually during the delivery of a service. Administrative data do not try to be representative. They just provide numbers on who they served, basically. Surveys, on the other hand, is a completely different source of information, where statisticians, because we cannot conduct censuses every year, because they're really costly endeavors, we collect information from a small sample of people. We use sampling methods to ensure as much as possible that the sample we have is representative of the population. And then we use statistical techniques in order to take the information of the respondents of that survey and somehow infer about the entire population that we're interested in. Reliability here is important because it affects the way that we can use these sources of evidence to infer on the true values of our population. True in quotes, obviously. But when we try to find out, we need to know how much confidence we have in the information, what the information provides us, and how much we can infer based on that information. Some examples are obviously the censuses. For administrative data, we have registrations for a national insurance number, which is the equivalent to Social Security, GP registrations, applications for asylum or grants for asylum, citizenship acquisitions and settlement are among the main types of administrative data that we have that can relate to migration. And for surveys, we mainly use ONS surveys that include the annual population survey, the labor force survey, and the international passenger survey. My presentation will mostly focus on these sources of data, on these examples. So let's see the Census of Population. It is the most complete source of information about the population we have. It can be particularly useful when we are interested in very small geographical areas where a survey, for example, might not have reliable estimates. And it is, on top of everything, supplemented by a survey that tries to detect and estimate those who may have been missed at first. However, the census also has limitations. It is only conducted every 10 years, with slow data releases because obviously the amount of information is vast, and it has very limited number of questions. This limits the information that we can draw on migrants from that. However, we do need to keep in mind that there's a trade-off there. If we include too many questions, then people might be discouraged to complete the questionnaire. So we try to include as much as possible without making the questionnaire too long. Despite trying to address everyone, the census remains an estimate and does have a margin of error. For example, our population estimates for England and Wales, we are about 95% confident that they are most likely plus or minus 83,000 from the number that we get. When you move on to smaller local areas, the range of error becomes larger. It is notable that at the moment we do not have specific confidence intervals that relate to country of birth from the census. So we are not entirely sure about the margin of error of foreign-born population based on the census. To move on to administrative information, we have the NINOs. New NINOs are issued to all non-UK nationals aged 16 or over working, planning to work, or claiming benefits in the UK. They can give us an indication of the number of economically active foreign nationals entering the UK and can be compiled by age, gender, nationality, and a range of territorial local units. However, we do not have information on the length of stay, and there is no requirement to deregister, which means that people who have left the country and may never return will remain registered in the system. It is not a reliable measure of the stock of migrants working in the country at a specific point in time because it does not track the current employment status of the people who have registered. Also, they do not take account of the length of time spent in employment, and they only refer to year of registration. For example, if I came to the UK as a student, 4 years may have passed and I register for a NINO on my 5th year. I will only be counted in NINOs that year. There is also no indication of internal movements within the UK. Let's move on to GP registrations, or what we call Flag 4 records. These are managed by the NHS, and it's a patient registration system. And they try to reflect the people who register with a GP in England and Wales and whose previous address was outside the UK and who have spent more than 3 months abroad. Note that the definition may differ from the other international long-term migration that we have discussed. All migrants, regardless of their age or status, are allowed to register. Unlike other admin sources, children are more likely to be recorded. So it has some advantages. However, there is no indication of the delay between the time of a person arrives and the time that they register. We also have evidence that some migrants never register for GP services, especially short-term migrants or young and healthy economic migrants. The Flag 4 code only refers to the first registration and does not keep track of internal movements. Also, information, nationality, and country of birth is still largely voluntarily offered and is not systematically collected. So we need to keep that in mind. Home Office statistics we'll see in more detail later on, but they track entries into the UK and changes in legal status for persons who are subject to immigration control. They refer to asylum, settlements, extensions of leave to remain, visas, detentions, deportations, etc. However, they do not have information on departure, so we cannot really use that for emigration or net migration. For the most part, we might have entry clearance visas or passenger entries that include people who would otherwise not qualify under the long-term international migrant definition. So we have deviations there. We also need to keep in mind that a lot of visas are issued to people who never arrived to the UK. And a lot of citizens of EEA countries and EFTA countries will not be counted unless it's part of naturalization and citizenship acquisitions because they're not subject to immigration control. So to move on to surveys, our main surveys here are the Annual Population Survey, or the APS, and the Quarterly Labour Force Survey, or LFS. The LFS is a large-scale quarterly survey of private addresses in the UK, and this is where we get our official releases of employment and unemployment stats. We can use it to get information on occupations, industries, skill levels, work experience, etc. The APS is the main population survey that tries to complement the census in between the census periods to give us some sort of more recent information. It uses the first and fifth waves of the LFS and provides extra boosts for geographical coverage and other residents. It has a good amount of people in the sample, so it reaches up to 360,000 people. And it aims as far as possible to have a minimum sample within each local authority. We very much like the LFS and the APS, and we use it a lot because it gives us more recent information, it gives us a wide variety of variables, and researchers can actually access the data and conduct their own analysis. However, any statistics produced by surveys, and this applies to all surveys, are estimates. They're not actual snapshots of the population. They have large margins of error, and the smaller the sample size, the larger margin of error. Local area estimates have smaller sample sizes, which means that they have larger margins of error. Another problem we need to keep in mind when it comes to surveys is that they consistently under-record recently arrived people who are more difficult to locate and take part of the survey. Short-term migrants, asylum seekers, refugees, any people in communal establishments, for example, university accommodation, hospitals, reception centers, under detention, etc., and irregular migrants who might, for other reasons, consider it risky to take part in the survey or for whatever other reason. The International Passenger Survey is a very important source of information because it is basically the only source of information that we have on UK flows of migrants. It is conducted by the ONS. It collects information at ports and airports, and about 4,000 or 5,000 can be defined as long-term international migrants under the definition that we discussed previously, the 12-plus month residents. So the IPS, with some adjustments, is the basis for the long-term international migration flows data that gives us immigration, emigration, and net balance. It primarily covers expenditure, tourism, and migration, but remains our only source on emigration. This is the source of data where we ask the main reason for the movement. This is where we ask people for whether they traveled for a job or to join family or to study, etc. The info can be broken down by nationality, sex and age groups, etc. So it can be really useful. However, the International Passenger Survey was not designed as a migration survey. Its coverage is not comprehensive, and it can exclude migration over the land border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. For the most part, it also excludes asylum seekers and irregular migrants other than people who might have been recorded on movement but then overstayed. The sample can be very small because it is a voluntary survey at ports and airports, and when we want to look at a small subset of a population group, for example, we want to look at Greek nationals who moved to the UK in July, we are talking about a very small subset where we will have a very small sample, which means substantial uncertainty. We cannot infer on the entire migration from Greece to the UK. And to finish off my presentation, although I'm sure we will see that in more detail later on, these are the main websites where we can go to access migration statistics. The ONS website, the statistics section, you can browse by theme or word search, and we will find any statistical ONS data on population, migration, labor market, flows, and much more. NOMIS is an interactive service provided by the ONS that gives us access to detailed and up-to-date official statistics for the UK. Keep in mind that when we say official statistics, we usually do not include administrative sources, because the technical issues behind their release tend to be different. Administrative data we can find from the statistics section of the UK government website, and for DWP data, we can go to the interactive data service to create customized tabulations and interactive charts. Thank you very much for your attention. For more information, you can always visit the Migration Observatory website, where you can find interactive charts and maps and other analyses that try to collect all of that information that we have both nationally and internationally and present it in user-friendly format for any kind of audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Yvonni. That was a very thorough and very comprehensive presentation, if I may say. There will be a few questions for that, but I'm going to put them back just a little bit so that we can press on with the final two presentations, if I may. So we'll have a Q&A in about 15 minutes' time when we've had these. So we're now going to move on to Dr. Chris Kershaw, who's from the Home Office. He's Program Director for Migration Statistics, with responsibility for a wide range of statistical outputs. He led a team of around 14 staff, producing Home Office main statistical outputs on the workings of the immigration system. He's speaking next, and then after him we'll have Andrew Martindale from the Office for National Statistics. He's been there for 6 years, working in social surveys, and then the 2011 census before joining the Migration Statistics Unit last year. His responsibilities include the operational management of statistics, managing data supplies, the processing and QA of the quality assurance, that is, of the data, and assisting with the analysis for their releases. So we're now going to move on to Dr. Chris Kershaw, who's going to present his presentation.
Okay. Well, first of all, can I just express my gratitude to Yvonni, who described some of the issues around production of Home Office migration statistics, which was very useful. I'll just make a little comment on the point about the limitations of international passenger survey. Although it does exclude most asylum seekers, there is an administrative adjustment as part of what are called the LTIM adjustments that bring in our admin data to make some adjustment for that particular flow. Some of our data maybe is a little bit in the shade of the ONS net migration figures that make a very big splash every quarter, but nevertheless, for the people who are not citizens of the European Economic Area or Switzerland, it provides a very detailed picture as to what is happening with respect to immigration. We produce very detailed data going down to the level of individual nationality for a range of topics, sponsorship for work and study, where we can look at education sector, university, further education, so on, and also at industry sector, different types of industry, as to who is coming into the UK. Visa data is also very useful in terms of seeing what the flows are. Admissions data has some similarities to visa data, but it provides a maybe more complete picture of all the people arriving, because, of course, there are non-visa nationals who are allowed to come as visitors for less than 6 months into the UK from countries like the United States, Brazil, Japan, and they're included in the admission data. Extensions is of interest. That's where someone is in the country, they've got a visa and they want to stay longer. There's been discussion of settlement and citizenship. we have data relating to detention and removals and voluntary departures. And actually, the removals and voluntary departures data does contain some EEA nationals within it, which is of interest. And of course, asylum, which is very topical these days. We also have three cross-cutting topics which relate to ONS data fairly well. We try to have comparisons between the different sources. For example, in comparing visa data with the data from the International Passenger Survey, but we also have a trend relating to visas of 1 year or more, which provides a better basis for comparison. Next slide is just showing you how much coverage there is each quarter when our figures come out. I think, by and large, the media do report the figures very accurately, but it's a bit of a sort of festival every quarter as to what's going on. I'll say a little bit about asylum because just to give you a flavour of some of the things that we produce in individual topic areas. You'll see here the trend over time in asylum applications to the UK. There was a peak in 2002, followed by a substantial fall. And in the last few years, we've had a fairly steady increase, but not to anything like the level that we had back in 2002. The value of the admin data is we can look at the individual nationalities. So, for example, the Eritreans are the top nationality for asylum applications in the year ending June 2015, Pakistan the next. But you see the numbers next to these show the previous rankings. We also show on the right-hand side of that table the grant rates based on the initial decision, and these vary a great deal between individual nationalities. So the number of applications doesn't represent the number of people who are actually granted asylum further down the line. Move on to the next slide. This is something that we have also published in our asylum topic brief. It's making comparisons between different countries across the EU. Germany, at the moment, looking at the year ending June 2015, has the highest number of asylum applications from main applicants and dependents, followed by Hungary, Sweden, Italy, France, Austria and the UK. There's also other Eurostat data that we quoted on this slide. It's very much an evolving picture, but I think it's of a lot more interest than it would have had 1 or 2 years ago. And finally, we've got some contacts for myself. David Matz, who is section head dealing with managed migration, that's the visa data, and so on. And Amy Everton, who is section head dealing with asylum and enforcement data. And we also have an email address that if people want to ask us questions, find out where the data that they're after might be, migration stats inquiries at homeoffice.gsi.gov.uk is the email address to use. And finally, I point out the web link that I've got at the bottom. We have a group of over 200 people in the Migration Statistics User Forum. We had our annual conference on Tuesday of this week. Information is sent out to this group. If you're interested in migration statistics and you're based in the UK, I'd suggest that you Google search migration stats Gmail and join that community because you'll find out a lot about what's going on.
Thank you very much, Chris. So that was Dr. Chris Kershaw, and I'll reiterate on that Gmail list. I'm a member of that, and it's hugely useful for me as, less of an expert amongst experts, so to speak, and it's very useful, very good access to expertise there. So we'll move straight on to the final presentation, which is Andrew Martindale from the Office for National Statistics. So Andrew, if you want to take over.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So in this presentation, I'll be covering the data that we published throughout the year, the definitions that we use, how we collect our data for the national statistics, the quality and limitations of our statistics and how the data should be interpreted. I'll briefly cover what our latest estimates show, the collaborative reporting that we do with the other government departments, and finally how to access our data. So each quarter, the provisional long-term international migration estimates that we publish are in our Migration Statistics Quarterly Report. We recently published on the 27th of August an estimated net migration for the year ending March 2015 to be plus 330,000, which gained quite a lot of media interest. The next Migration Statistics Quarterly Report is due to be published on the 26th of November, and this will provide data for the year ending June 2015. So the data is published 5 months after each reference period. Our other quarterly releases are in February and May. Final estimates for the previous calendar year, including a more detailed IPS and long-term international migration estimate breakdown, are also published annually each November. And the IPS is the International Passenger Survey, which has been touched on before, but I'll go into more detail later on. So looking at this slide, the second bullet point, we also publish short-term international migration data, and that's those that come to the UK for between 1 to 12 months and 3 to 12 months, and this is published annually each May, the most recent publication having data up to 2013. We produce stock estimates, that's the estimates on the population of the UK by the country of birth and nationality. Again, this is an annual publication that we produce in August, the latest having data for calendar year 2014. And we produce a local area migration indicator suite, again in August. And this is a spreadsheet that pulls together several already published local area data sources that relate to migration statistics. For example, GP registrations for non-UK born residents, births to non-UK born mothers, and national insurance numbers for foreign nationals. So the next slide, I'll cover the definitions that we use. For our long-term international migration flows estimates to the UK, we use the UN standard definition of a long-term migrant, and that is a person that moves to a country other than that of his or her usual residence for the period of at least a year. And this is the internationally recognised definition that allows comparisons between countries and across time. We also produce estimates on short-term migration, like I've mentioned, and that's those that arrive to the UK for a period of between 1 and 12 months and 3 to 12 months, but it excludes those that are coming to the UK for recreational purposes or religious pilgrimage. The majority of the political and media attention focuses on our long-term international migration flows, so I'll be focusing on that for this presentation. So now I'm going to go into detail on how we calculate our long-term international migration or LTIM estimates. These estimates are mostly based on the data from the International Passenger Survey, which includes adjustments for asylum seekers, non-asylum enforced removals, visitor and migrant switchers, and flows to and from the Northern Ireland. As already mentioned, the IPS is a large multi-purpose sample survey, and this collects information from passengers as they leave or enter the UK. It's used to provide data about international migration, travel expenditure and tourism. And this sample is conducted at all main air, sea, tunnel ports into and out of the UK. The IPS long-term migration data is intentions-based, and about 5,000 respondents each year are identified as long-term migrants. The ONS then use data from the Northern Ireland Statistics and Research Agency to make Northern Ireland adjustments, and the Home Office provide us with data to calculate an asylum seeker and non-asylum enforced removals adjustment. And as already stated, the IPS long-term migrants are those who state an intention to change their country of residence for at least a year. However, it's known that these intentions aren't always realised. We therefore also make adjustments for migrant switchers, and these are people who state that they intend to migrate for 1 year or more, but change their intentions and actually leave sooner. And we make adjustments for visitor switchers, who are the opposite. These are people that intend to stay for short term, but in fact end up staying for longer than 12 months. And these adjustments are necessary to produce a more comprehensive estimate for our international migration. So now I'm going to cover what we measure. So we measure the long-term immigration, emigration and net migration, sometimes referred to as balance. And the net migration is the immigration minus emigration estimate. Also, we measure the migrants' characteristics, and quarterly we publish this data by citizenship and main reason for migration, but annually in November we publish a more detailed characteristic tables once this provisional data becomes final. So some of the variables that we collect from the IPS are citizenship, country of birth and country of last or next residence, age, sex, their intended and actual length of stay, occupation and marital status. And our next detailed release will be on Thursday the 26th of November. So talking about the quality of our LTIM estimates now. So the International Passenger Survey is a fit for purpose in terms of measuring migration flows into and out of the UK. The IPS provides reliable data on international migration at the national level, and this is supported by the small 0.8% difference that we found between the 2001 and 2011 population estimates and the results of the 2011 census. The IPS can be used to produce reliable breakdowns of migration characteristics at the national level. However, as already mentioned, the IPS is not suitable for producing detailed estimates on particular characteristics for smaller geographical areas. And since the IPS is a sample survey, there will be uncertainty around the estimates, so the IPS estimates shouldn't be used as exact counts. The IPS was considerably improved as part of the Migration Statistics Improvement Programme, and this resulted in a larger sample size to around 800,000 passengers per year, and improved coverage for all regional airports and for migration purposes. The IPS refusals are around 3%, and this is the lowest that we have for any official voluntary survey. As with all surveys, the IPS is subject to sampling variability, and this means that if many samples were drawn, each set of the estimates would vary slightly. Published estimates are based upon a single sample that was taken at the time, and is the best estimate of the true value based on the data that we've collected. However, to account for sampling variability, these estimates are published alongside a 95% confidence interval, and these confidence intervals are published in our tables as an indicator of our accuracy. So on this slide, I'm looking at the penultimate bullet point now. The statistical tests are used to determine whether any increases or decreases that we see in these estimates from the IPS could be due to chance, or whether they are likely to represent a real change in migration patterns. If the test shows that the changes are unlikely to have occurred through chance alone, and are likely to reflect a real change, then the change is described as statistically significant. The IPS figures broadly follow the same patterns that we see in other data sources, for example the Home Office visa statistics for work and study, and our statistics passed a strict UKSA assessment for their national statistics status in 2014, and this provides us with the confidence that the estimates are fit for purpose. So going on to my next slide now, the limitations of our LTIM estimates, and some of these would have been touched on already in the former presentations. The International Passenger Survey has confidence intervals, and these do not account for non-sampling errors. Also non-response bias. And non-response bias would be introduced if those who choose to respond to the survey have different characteristics to those who don't. One of the key features of the IPS long-term migration data is that it's intention-based, and as I've already touched on, IPS long-term migrants state an intention to change their country of residence for at least a year. However, this isn't always realised. So I spoke about the migrant and visitor switches earlier. These are limitations, but we can try to adjust for them. As in all surveys, there are known issues with respondents being able to record precise information. For example, immigrants are asked their intended area of residence when they arrive to the UK, and many of them state an intention to reside in London. However, in reality, they may well just stay there for a few weeks or months before moving to another part of the UK. Therefore, we use the labour force survey that Yvonni touched on, which provides a reliable data on the regional distribution of immigrants as it records information on immigrants that are currently resident in the UK. Therefore, we redistribute our IPS total inflow estimates using a methodology that we know as calibration, and this redistributes the IPS data across the UK based on the LFS results. So now I'm going to show you an example of our outputs. It might be a bit difficult to see on the screen here, but here's our LTIM Table 1, which shows our citizenship estimates. And net migration, here you can see, was plus 330,000, which you can find at the bottom of column B. After we complete our statistical tests, we can determine whether the increase from plus 236,000 the previous year was statistically significant, and that means it's likely to be a real-world increase. In this case it was, and this is highlighted in our table. And if you look at the top of the table, you can see a tick box. This allows the users to use an option to automatically highlight any statistical significant increases or decreases over the last year. This is a recent improvement, and this aims to assist the users in easily identifying any real-world changes on the previous year. And I'd just like to highlight that we always report on changes over the previous year rather than the last quarter, and this is because migration has a seasonal effect. For example, quarter 3 in the year often sees the largest levels of migration, probably due to the end and start of the academic year. Again, in this table next to the estimates, you can see that we're transparent that these estimates contain a level of uncertainty, and we publish the confidence intervals displayed in this example as plus or minus CI, and this provides the users the confidence around that estimate, and further information on the confidence intervals is provided to our users in the table footnotes and in the guidance documentation. So at this point I'd like to highlight that we produce two different types of tables. Some are purely based on the IPS estimates, and some are based on LTIM, which is the IPS estimates plus the adjustments that I've mentioned. This is because certain characteristics and cross-tabulations are only available based on the IPS estimates. Therefore, the total migration estimates in the IPS-only tables will not match the total migration figure in our LTIM tables, and where possible, we always report on LTIM figures, as these are considered more accurate. Okay, so this graph shows immigration, emigration, and net migration estimates over time. It highlights that the net migration estimates, which you can see here in dark green, between 2001 and 2011, have been revised following the results of the 2011 census, where it was identified that net migration had previously been underestimated. Although ONS have been able to accurately revise the net migration estimates, we've not revised estimates for immigration or emigration, or any further disaggregations, and users are made aware that they should be cautious of this in any analysis completed in this decade. Again, further information is detailed in our table notes and our supporting documentation. So I've just been prompted that I've got a short period amount of time, so I'm going to skip our latest headline figures, but these are available in the slide pack, should you want to take a look. So I'm going to go into detail about our collaborative reporting. The Migration Statistics Quarterly Report is a collaborative report which, as well as the LTIM and IPS data, also includes the latest labour market data on non-UK employment in the UK. Visa data and commentary is provided by the Home Office, and National Insurance Number data is provided by the Department for Work and Pensions. Inclusion of these data allow users to find the latest migration data from across the government departments in one place. The Home Office and DWP also input into key meetings, and they're involved in the QA of our release. And by sharing the data and working together, we can better understand the real-world trends of migration in the UK. Separate to our quarterly release, ONS have also set up 3 research projects, and these projects will cover the 3 main reasons for migration to and from the UK. That's to work, to study, to accompany, join others, and these projects will look at the various data sources that we measure for each strand, with the aim to provide users with the reasons why the data sources differ. And one example of this could be definition differences. So here's a slide with a link to our website, and this is our release theme page. For the purposes of time, I'll skip over this, but in this screenshot, if you look at it later, you can see where to find the necessary data in our quarterly report. As well as publishing the data online on our website, we also publish the data through social media. Our statistics are promoted on Twitter and Facebook, and again the details are on screen, so please follow us. Infographics like the one that you can see here are produced to accompany the key messages, And more recently, social media engagement has proven very popular. Our migration statistics trended in the UK in May on Twitter, which no doubt was aided by the general election. I expect, though, that the majority of the general public access our migration statistics via the news. So here's the contact details should you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Very, very interesting once again. So we're going to take a bit of Q&A now, and I think I'll go in reverse order. So there are a few questions that came in for that last presentation. I'll go through a few of them now. Very topical, we had a question from Eleanor Beale, who asked, is it possible to take students out of the net migration figures, or do they have to be counted if they are here for more than a year? I've seen this mentioned in Parliament, the UK House of Commons a few times, whether it's even desirable to include students in the net migration target that the government sets in this country. Andrew, do you have that?
I think I'm sorry, I'm Nicola here. I work with Andrew, so I'll take. And possibly Chris can help as well. We have been having this debate. I mean, at the moment we publish our statistics using UN definition, and they will continue to be our headline figures. But we're also discussing whether we could look at variations of whether we could take students out or include them. This is something that we're looking at going forward. But at the moment we are using our UN definition because our migration figures also feed into the population estimates. So they're needed for this. So it's something that we are aware of and that we are engaging with government with. So if you want anything more, Chris?
Well, I just say that most jurisdictions that publish net migration figures don't make a distinction between the reason for migration when they publish. So, Canada, Australia, United States don't do this. So, I think it's here to stay, the net migration figure that the ONS produces. There's question marks over whether some target might include or not include some categories.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for that, Chris. We also had a question from Ed Smithson on the final presentation. He asked, when you mentioned about migrant and visitor switchers that are included in the estimate, he's wondering how they're estimated.
Sure. So, introduction of a question on the International Passenger Survey can identify these. So for former immigrants that may leave, they would be asked their intentions, whether their intentions were met when they arrived in the country. It's also aided by two variables that we collect, which are the intended length of stay for migrants and the actual length of stay for migrants. And various adjustments. I couldn't tell you the mathematical adjustments over the phone, but adjustments are made based on these results.
We do have to guys as well.
Yes, go on. Go ahead.
The more detailed answer to that question can be found in our user guides, which can be found via the links in the presentation. Or if you'd like to email in to the email address on the screen, we'd be happy to provide a fuller answer.
Wonderful, thank you. Can I just throw in a quick question of my own as well? You mentioned toward the end of your presentation, Andrew, some research work streams on the different on work study and accompanying joining reasons for migration. I was wondering if there was any publications that might come out of that and when we might expect them.
Yeah, we're aiming to put some publications out towards the end of the year. So we'll be looking at all the different data sources that measure the different streams and reconciling these different data sources to provide our users with information on how they can interpret it, why we're seeing these differences. And then we're putting together some conceptual frameworks as well to help users understand this, and then we hope to publish by the end of the year. They'll be published on the ONS website.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Just flipping back to Dr. Chris Kershaw's presentation, I was very interested. It's obviously very topical that a lot of people are talking about asylum applications with all the business that's been going on in Europe. It was very interesting, this graph that you showed. What's really striking about that actually is that even though, obviously this isn't up to date with the latest situation, but in recent years haven't really compared at all to asylum applications going back a decade at the early 2000s. Do you know why there's such a peak at the start of that graph?
Well, there was all the issues around the Western Balkans and other asylum seeker flows at that time. The topic brief that we produced on asylum does explain some of the background to why the figures fell as they did. I mean, one of the factors that influenced it was the implementation of what are called juxtaposed controls in France and Belgium, where UK immigration officers would screen people arriving to catch Eurostar or going on to ferries before they actually travelled. And that made quite a difference, but there were other factors as well. So I'd refer you to our asylum topic brief.
Thank you very much, Chris. So we had some questions as well on the presentation from Yvonni from the Migration Observatory. So Yvonni, just to ask you, and by the way everyone, you can press *6 on your phone if you want to unmute yourself, just to remind you of that. Yvonni, we had a question, someone mentioning that the majority of statistics on migration seem quite national focused on England and Wales. And this person was wondering for a bit more detail on how local organisations might find statistics for their local areas and how local can we be?
Thank you for this question. This question seems to come up in a lot of meetings we have at the local level, because we present the statistics that we have, and a lot of the complaints that we get is, well, very nice, very interesting, but what about my local authority, my region, my district? There's no, unfortunately, good answer to this. If we want reliable information for really small local areas, we have to rely on the census. And for administrative data, for example, you might find NINO registrations, GP registrations, etc. for your district. However, we also need to keep in mind that we have various statistical offices within the UK. So the Scottish Statistical Service is a bit separate from the Office for National Statistics, and for example, some of the census information that we have does not refer to Scotland. Also, we need to keep in mind that the census questionnaires vary between England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. So some of the measures that we have, for example, passports held, are only asked for England and Wales.
Just to jump in there from sorry.
Go ahead.
Continue there, Yvonni.
Sorry? I couldn't hear that.
Is that
sorry, continue. I was going to follow up after you.
Okay, wonderful. Just to finish off, Yvonni.
Yes, I'm finished. Don't worry. I just wanted to say that, unfortunately, if we want local area level information, our first go-to data source is the census. Secondarily, we can look at some administrative sources, mostly from the Department of Work and Pensions and the NHS. And thirdly, we can look at the annual population survey, which gives us information for some local areas. However, for example, the 2014 information was just released. So there is an important time lag that statisticians cannot overcome, because the year has to end, the information has to be processed, a lot of filters for quality control need to be applied, and by the time all of these happen and we get the release, we might be in the middle of 2015. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Andrew, did you want to come in on that with a point?
Yes, thank you. Just to highlight that ONS do produce this local area migration indicator suite every August. And as part of that, we do have international inflow and outflow estimates available to a local authority level. The data is not directly comparable with our quarterly LTIM and IPS estimates, but it's based on the international migration element of our population estimates. So it's the best local area migration indicator that we have. So this was recently published on the 27th of August, And actually alongside of that, we produced a quiz that allows users to type in their postcode and look at migration at their level. The local area migration indicator suite would be also a good first port of call.
Yes, go ahead, Chris.
The immigration system is UK focused in that you're given leave to remain within the UK. So we don't have very much information at the local level, but we do publish information on those receiving asylum support by local authority area. So that is in our regular quarterly release that we have that information.
Oh, wonderful, thank you again. So very helpful answers there from all of you. Another point on your presentation, Yvonni, which actually ties into the UN presentations that we started with. I found it very interesting when you mentioned the confidence interval for the census. Something like plus or minus 83,000 is the confidence interval for the UK census.
England, Wales.
England and Wales, pardon me. That's small by comparison to the whole population, but not inconsiderable. And I was just wondering, going back to the UN presenters at the start, do you have any data that you receive on an international level about the quality of the census data that you get? And is there any way for users to find out about any confidence intervals that they might have?
Well, this depends really on the source of information, the type of data, and who releases it. So what I would suggest is really for people who try to access information on migration statistics to try to read the small print, to try to understand what each measure they're looking at refers to. Every publication of official and administrative statistics comes with extensive explanations and caveats and tries to explain who is excluded, who may be missed, and a lot of them come with confidence intervals included. For example, the IPS now includes, and the LTIM includes, confidence intervals. However, for the most part, when we get into international level information that has already been, as far as statisticians can go, standardized and made into comparable estimates, all we can do is roughly approximate and give an indication of who might be missed. But we rarely get true full confidence intervals for all countries and for all data sources.
May I jump in? Hi. So we actually have recommendations for countries to conduct what they call post-enumeration survey after the census is being done. Not all countries have that kind of practice, and if they have such information, they usually go with their metadata. But that's for the whole population. It does get tricky when you're talking about migrants per se. How many you've missed. This is in correspondence to the earlier question also on the quality of whether you miss a lot of migrants. What we see in the data, the raw data that came from countries is because of the way that census question was formulated, it's really hard to tell whether, when you ask country of birth, it's hard to tell whether the person, so we got a lot of unknowns, but we don't know whether the person, whether it was a foreign-born unknown or a native-born unknown where they were born, or completely unknown where the person was born, whether it's foreign. So it's sometimes we really see a huge percentage of unknown country of birth. So that gets really, the data quality is always an issue with a lot of censuses. If I can get back to you on the question you had about reasons for migration in national
by all
censuses.
means, yes. Yeah, no, I find that very interesting.
Yeah, I just counted. So we have 17 countries that have asked that question in the last round.
17. Okay, so
17.
Quite a small number then.
It's not very big. So that's only for international migrants. But then there's also usually when they collect information on internal migration, place of previous residence, there are about another 15 countries ask, why did you move? But if your previous resident happen to be abroad, then you get some kind of information from there also. But it's not very big.
I see. Look, thank you very much for finding those numbers for me. Can I just to finish off really, throw out an interesting question we got toward the start, which I think applies to all the speakers. Ed Smithson asked, what are the most common misconceptions about migration statistics that the panelists have seen in the national and international media? This is a subject close to my heart, by the way, since I often have to fact-check what the media say about migration statistics. Piotr, we didn't ask you very many questions earlier, so do you have would you like to respond to that? You can press *6 if you want to unmute yourself. Anyone else chip in, by the way, if you wish as well.
Yeah, okay, I am on now. Sorry, would you mind repeating the question? I was just on something else.
Sure. This was Ed Smithson at the start. He asks, what are the most common misconceptions about migration statistics that you've seen in the national and international media?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's a good point, actually. The most striking, I think, in the area of international migration, in particular in the context of the European Union, we often see that there might be a misinterpretation of what the emigration figures to the EU mean. People tend simply to aggregate the figures on, let's say, immigration for various EU countries, and then try to come up with the total figure for the EU. And this is simply not. This is obviously not that simple, because we have to take into account the intra-EU movement. I mean, it was shown on one of the previous presentations that there are different types of migrations: internal migrations, which can be from one city to the other, but they are also internal migrations when you talk about the specific geographical area, like the countries of the European Union. So that means often you have the users that simply download the data and make a use of that, with in fact making quite a big error. And then this is possibly that's what's striking most. Then you also have principal users asking for any type of specific problems. I can just relate maybe to the area which is now very high in the news, in the area of asylum. We see that the people are interpreting the figures in a sense that they would like to see the net figure of the asylum seekers in the EU, again interpreting the EU as a region, but not having in mind that there is no common system yet of registering the people. So effectively we have 28 different systems in the EU, and although most of that, and this refers not just to asylum but the entire migration statistics, although we have users have an impression that data are well harmonized because they are based on common definitions, but this is just in defining what the output of the data is, and this is not very far from defining how the input should be defined. And of course, the main difficulty is that if garbage comes into the registers or surveys, then it will also come out. So that's our concern. And the users, it's very time-consuming actually also, and it's very repetitive. In fact, the same user is always often asking similar questions. So that's what takes a lot of time for us.
Thank you, Piotr. Yes, it's a good point that often users' questions doesn't conveniently match the limitations of the data itself. Chris, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking the most common misconceptions. I think the general public find it a bit hard to understand the concept of net migration, and it's got positive and negative elements in it, and you can get quite confused as to what figures mean.
Absolutely. And as I said, my own experience of this, a lot of misunderstanding in the media, much more so if you take it back 4 or 5 years when there was even a confusion over the difference between immigration and net migration. Often one quoted but defined in the wrong way, and this often gave a slightly distorted perception in the national headlines of how many people are actually coming into the country. Does anyone else, any of the other presenters, have any thoughts on that before we close?
Hi, it's Andrew from... Sorry,
go ahead, Andrew.
Hi there, so Andrew from the ONS here. I'd just like to say that one of the misconceptions that we have for the media is that they tend not to acknowledge that our estimates are in fact that's estimates, and they have confidence intervals alongside them. It may be inferred by the media that what we're producing accounts of migrants. Another misconception, well, misrepresentation possibly, that we commonly find in the media more recently is that our estimates are being published alongside stories referring to illegal migrants, which again may infer that we're calculating, or our estimates are for illegal migrants entering the UK, and possibly overlook the definitions that we're using.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. And again, very common experience as well. Uncertainty is often the hardest thing to communicate in statistics because often it makes sense for a headline to have a very obvious number, a simple answer, and that often is not that simple, particularly if it's a very small change year on year. Competence intervals matter a lot. Okay, if there's no further comments, we've overrun a little bit, but we started a bit late. Thank you very much, all of you, for dialing in. Thank you to all our presenters. We hope you found the session very useful. To remind you that a podcast for this event will be available on the RSS website and YouTube very shortly. And you can check out the RSS website for the next Professional Statisticians Forum online event. So, as I said, hope you all found that very useful, and thank you very much for tuning in.